All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to our final session of Emerge Workplace. It's been a wonderful 2 days, and we're so thankful that all of you are able to spend time with us. We've got today a wonderful moderated panel here that are going to address some of the questions and themes that we heard throughout the day. We have Bulbul Gupta from Pacific Community Ventures and Jill Personett from Comcast. So thank you both for joining us. I first want to say that, Bulbul, if Lila didn't have a personal fan club before today's event, she absolutely has one now. And
get in line.
Yeah, I tell you, I mean, and you know, I know that the Bay Area cupcake scene is likely to be overrun with our attendees, and she's gonna have to figure out how to get those cupcakes shipped across the country, because here in Maine, I am desperately in need of some of those cupcakes. What an inspiring story.
PCV is happy to help cater if you ever want to bring your conference to the Bay Area.
That's good.
My daughters are first fan club for Lila.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'm gonna start with Jill and give you just a chance to breathe before doing that. But Jill, you know, what a wonderful session that you and Stephen and Hannah sort of led, helping us really think about the way that HR leaders can really think of themselves as innovators within the company. One of the things that, you know, our audience really caught on to was this notion of storytelling and how Comcast is taking not only this mountain of data that you're collecting, but also using those personal stories when you're out meeting with your workforce. How do you package all of that into a comprehensive, you know, story to help your leaders and others make the decisions about which solutions to implement?
Such a wonderful question, especially when you think about what everyone's focused on. And it really has to be packaged in digestible, readable, actionable delivery. We could go back at people with so much data related to their ask, but we try to take a step back and say, okay, we need to give them the information that they can respond to and react to in short snippets versus going through the analysis paralysis. So we always circle back to what was the ask and what were they trying to achieve for the business and how did it come about? So we always resurface that, and then we come back with no more than 6 pages within, whether it depends on the delivery. It could be a deck, it could be a video, it could be an Excel document, depending on what the ask is. And we really keep it digestible, because otherwise it almost creates a paralysis on how to act. However, it's also where's the audience? You know, we have to deliver our materials in multiple different ways depending on the audience. So usually we start with our executive summary at the top. And then as we continue on with what we call our roadshow and speaking to all the appropriate individuals, the decks do grow. And they grow based on the need and the impact of that individual to the business. So as we get back to really speaking to the HR member in the field that's dealing with the employee, their deck tends to be much larger because they really want to get into the nitty gritty and figure out how is this product that we've asked you to help us deliver really going to make my life easier sitting here in this office with 400 to 500 people. So, you know, it really is tailored. We may have up to 20 decks on one topic and really just scale them appropriately based on the audience. So that's really how we approach it, Matt.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, Vicki in her opening remarks today really talked about the different skills that are shaping the economy. And during your session, it was apparent that all of those skills are actively at work in the work you guys are doing. So that's wonderful. Bulbul, I want to turn to you now. So much of the last 2 days have really been focused on sort of benefits and aspects of compensation. And while these are absolutely central, you know, you guys are really talking about good jobs and good jobs as part and part of financial health. So what is a good job? How do you and PCV think about good jobs?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Good question. So first of all, you know, if we know that half of America's workers are employed by small businesses, and, you know, technically the definition for small businesses in the US is 500 or under, which the bulk of our businesses are literally like 2 to 20 employees. So actually from micro to small, right? And that's where a lot, especially when we think about Black and brown workers, that's where a bulk of them are employed in our main streets, right? So if we know that we want to have community wealth building outcomes and we want to be addressing racial and gender wealth gaps, then what are the elements of a good job that we need to make sure we're building a financial floor for future mobility from? So when we think about it that way, the elements that we've really identified in the last few years as being important through our research has been a fair living wage, That's sort of first and foremost, I'm sure. We've found a fair, engaging workplace. So do you have worker voice? Do you listen to your workers and feedback like Lila was describing in our session, to sort of help think through priorities? Are you creating learning and development opportunities for them, or are you just kind of using them up and turning them out the back door, so that they are able to grow and advance into new jobs internally, be promoted internally potentially? Are you contributing to their wealth building? Is that, a combination of retirement? Is it something else? So that you're really thinking about their long-term well-being. Even things like stable scheduling, which, seems it's one of the low-cost, earliest improvements we see our small business owners making. And it seems so simple, but when you think about it from the worker perspective, knowing how many hours you are going to work and when in the next 2-3 weeks out allows you to not only plan for your family, childcare if you need it, transportation if you need it, but it also lets you know what kind of predicted income you can expect so that you can budget for all of the rest of the things. And that we know is incredibly important for the financial mental health of our workers, as well as just building that floor. So those are the things we really sort of focus the most on, along with a few other pieces. But for the most part, that's where we focus a lot of our effort. So how we design capital and advising and mentorship to help them get there.
Yeah, I think so many of the elements you talked about, while certainly very important for small businesses, scale to employers of any size. Because those are really the things that we know have direct impacts on not just worker financial health, but that broader sense of engagement that employers are looking for. And when we say engagement in this context, it's that emotional connection you feel to the work you're doing and the ability to bring your best self to work every day. We got another question that I'm actually going to take an attempt to address, because it's a really interesting, but also I think very complex question. There's lots of activity around this issue right now. And this question was really around how can you measure your customer and shareholder interest, and how equitably caring for your employees and financial health programs you provide. In other words, how do you help broaden the range of stakeholders who are bought into this initiative around worker financial health? And I think there's some interesting things happening right now, but I'll caveat that by saying there's a lot more work to be done in this space. Yesterday during our first session with Franz Pasha and Grace Zunzik, they talked deeply about this notion of conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, about broadening the range of interests and really thinking about prioritization of those interests across not just your shareholders, but your employees, your community, your customers, et cetera. The fact that we had two companies talking about that yesterday, I think is one indication that this is an active conversation within many organizations of all sizes. Another aspect of this, I think you continue to see a lot of momentum around ESG investing strategies and how those are really influencing, at least at the shareholder level and certainly the C-suite level, what's happening with broadening that range. We're also seeing more and more companies that are voluntarily disclosing data. Things like EEO-1 disclosures are certainly on the rise. And, some of our partners at Just Capital and other places are really beating the drum on getting more companies to sort of engage in that practice. We're also continuing to see new potential regulations coming through, the SEC about disclosure. So there's a lot of moving apparatuses about how do you sort of reorient towards this. But I also think ultimately one of the things that would be value added to this conversation is continuing to build that repository that doing good for your people is good for your business. And we certainly have examples, and there are some longitudinal studies and other examples where tracking shareholder price growth to investment in workforces and investment in your people, creating cultures of health is a really important way to do that. This is not going to be solved by any one of those things. It's my perspective. It's likely going to take a combination of those things in order to really drive forward and expand the range of stakeholders and, and interests that can drive forward and make these initiatives part and parcel of that. So it's company culture, it's courageous leadership from those, it's investor relationship management, it's regulatory apparatuses, and it's this type of conversation with folks that are committed to reinventing and reimagining the way that work is done and reimagining the way that corporations and other interested parties can engage. So I don't know if anyone would add to that, Bubble or Jill, but that's sort of, I think, as I think about the landscape and what's happening out there.
I don't disagree, Matt. I think the only thing I would add is that, keeping it in the back of their minds that they need to continue to think holistically. How does this financial space come into one's overall emotional, and medical. So really thinking physical, financial, and emotional in the entire continuum as they move forward, because there is such an impact on all of the other key areas as they move throughout the journey.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
Bulbul,
I
you
would
can
just
say
add,
something?
I was just thinking, as you were talking, like having been in the impact and sustainable investing space for the last many years, it's really nice to see some of this market pressure in companies, using these practices and standards that we helped launch. From my perspective, I think working at a CDFI now, one of the things I think a lot about is it's one thing for us, CDFIs were born out of the tail end of the civil rights legislation to address systemic discrimination and redlining. So when I think about how we show up, I think for a lot of years we have shown up as sort of how do we structure financial systems down market. I'm much more interested in what is actually human-centered design for the communities we want to be serving, especially Black and Brown communities for whom we were born to address. And how do they need capital and support to show up in a way that works for them? So if we really want to practice our impact and sustainable investing principles and be able to connect with communities and customers that deeply, it's a different design thinking mindset than just structuring, smaller size products down. We know consumers are looking to buy from, invest in, and work in companies that do well by doing good. So in our own version, that's the change-making power of small businesses in our main streets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think also just for, folks within our audience that are HR leaders, these are conversations that HR leaders never historically were a part of or were sort of brought into. And now we're seeing so many organizations that are really leading with that human component. And so we really also see opportunities for HR functions and HR leaders to be ascendant in helping to transform the way in which work is done. And to your point, Bulbul, to really help realign the investment structures and the opportunities to promote more advantages for those that have historically been left out of those opportunities. So we could talk about, impact investing all day. This is an HR conference. I want to get us a little bit back towards a more grounded topic. Jill, you had mentioned something about sort of also taking into account emotional and mental health. And we certainly are seeing a lot of energy around mental health right now, particularly as it relates to the pandemic, the events of last year, workplaces starting to sort of emerge from the fog of 2020. How do you think about the intersection of financial health and overall health in the work that you do?
We actually feel that they're critical. It's a key component because what happens is you can't look at an individual in a silo. So you shouldn't look at the delivery of what you're offering to them in a silo either. And at the end of the day, if you think about financial, well, my physical and my emotional health all have a dollar to them. So whether that dollar is to what I need to pay out of my pocket for my co-pays or premiums, or if that's a dollar impacts me and how I can function at home or at work and how I can really drive myself and my family and my friends in society, they are so intertwined. And I think what we have done in the past is we have a tendency to forget about the connection points, how important it is to look at the whole person and look at every aspect of it. Now, one might have a stronger drive than the other. It just depends on the time of year and the situation and the individual. But really, you can't move forward in creating a strong benefit program, platform, or offering without making sure really the individuals in the middle in all three of those areas, physical, financial, and emotional, are all touching the person at the same time. And so for us, it is absolutely key. And we constantly have to remind individuals like, well, what about this situation and why is it so important? Because at the end of the day, if I'm not emotionally well, I don't show up at work. And if I don't show up at work, then I'm also not driving impact to the business, which is a dollar for the organization in which you work for. And then I'm also not driving an impact for myself. And so I'm just not present. And it really goes back to, we need and want everybody to be present in order to really be effective. And so to us, they have to go hand in hand with one another.
I love this conversation. We've just been talking about psychological safety on our team this past, couple of months for our own staff, but also bringing in more and more advisors, HR advisors too, into our business advising platform to be able to do more sort of trauma-informed care for our small business owners, because we know when you're thinking about racial injustice and economic injustice, and then this COVID crisis, how we show up for our small business owners, the coaching we do for their workers, completely. I mean, from our context, for our own team and for the communities we serve, it's really important to be able to bring that kind of mindset. I really appreciate you talking about that.
It really is. And the struggle, though, is it's kind of getting others, this kind of goes back to what Stephen and I talked about the creativity and thinking differently. This topic is one that is prime for that, because everybody has always in the past focused on, if you need a counselor, call your EAP or your behavioral health plan. Well, not everyone needs a counselor. Sometimes they need a coach. Sometimes they just need a friend to phone, and that they don't want to talk about their personal situation with their next door neighbor. Or they might be in a situation where it's about, gosh, I work out all day long, but God, I come home and eat a pizza and a whole, carton of ice cream. So I'm just never losing this weight. What's the problem? And I think what people need to think about in their delivery of this topic in the intersections with financial is, how do we best message to really help everybody understand every one of us could use this assistance in the emotional and mental space. But how do we make sure people break down those barriers to recognize there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have that conversation, and really continue to think about the delivery will only help us be better in the long run. And then that will flow into, Matt, like the overall arching question of financial health. Because if I'm comfortable with the delivery and how I can best express myself on the emotional side, it will just flow into all the other aspects of how I do my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trauma and psychological safety and being able to be your best self at times that matter most. I mean, that's a human endeavor, right? That's not just a workplace endeavor. That's a human endeavor. And with so much of us spending more and more time engaged in work, the lines between the human endeavor and the work endeavor, we used to think about separation. That's a completely falsehood. It's integration, right? It's part and parcel. It's a continuum. And so what's happening in our life absolutely impacts what happens at work. And what happens at work absolutely impacts what happens in our life. And that's not even talking about the broader social context of what's happening all around us. So the good news is we have a lot more work to do collectively, and we're going to continue these conversations. I want to thank both Jill and Bulbul for joining us today. I wanted to close out by, I think, highlighting what I thought was one of the most powerful quotes from the last 2 days. And this came from the session with Michael and Taria. And I want to just read it as we close out. You can't have an honest discussion about financial health and equity without starting with pay equity. And I think that's a really important reminder that income and that paycheck is the essential building block of personal financial health. And so as organizations are evolving their benefit strategies, ensuring that compensation approach is part of that overall, and using compensation as a vehicle to promote greater equity, as a way to enrich and lift up those individuals who have been left behind, and recognizing that people's lives are complicated. And that compensation of itself is an important metric. We heard about leave policies and the role that they play. We heard about all of these different things. I think the big challenge for HR leaders and others is, how do you just make sense and design a program that integrates all of these things and that has measurable impact? And that's certainly the challenge that we're helping to tackle with our partnerships with organizations like Comcast, with PCV. And so I want to just thank our audience for joining us today. We hope you can continue to stay engaged with the Emerge platform and all of our workplace topic areas. We've got a lot of activity going on over the next several months and throughout the year. Also, please save the date for our Emerge Financial Health event, June 8th through the 10th and the 23rd. Thank you again to our sponsors and all of our audience members who joined us. And a big thanks to our event staff here at Financial Health Network for just making this a seamless experience, despite my hot mic episode to start the event yesterday, which was mainly my fault. But other than that, just thank you to our wonderful events team and all of the partners internally and externally. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we'll continue the conversation at a future date.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.